Alright, it's time for another edition of our Klub Outside Q&A Roundup series. Now, as always, Kubo takes and answers a variety of questions directly from fans over on his personal Q&A platform, and then we try to dissect those answers right here on the channel and see if there's anything of value to be found among them. Now, a lot of the time, Kubo's comments are a mix of light-hearted chatter and fluff, but sometimes we are given real, genuine insight into the story and world of Bleach that, for whatever reason, wasn't found in the original material. And as always, I'm not going to be looking at every single answer he's ever given, nor even necessarily looking at them in any kind of chronological order either. Instead, I'm trying to curate the answers that I find to be the most interesting and to have the most value, and then bring those to you. And so, speaking of which, this time the questions revolve around the topic of Kenpachi versus Aizen, Forbidden Kidō, Isane's apparently monstrous strength, and more. As always, a huge thank you goes out to M Shadows for providing the translations to the questions and answers, and as always there is a link in the description to where you too can go and find them, so make sure to check them out. Right, on with the latest roundup. We'll start with the topic that was perhaps unsurprisingly making the rounds the most recently, and that's Kenpachi versus Aizen. Before we get started on today's video, guys, if you haven't done already and you liked the video today and you want to support the channel even a little bit, consider hitting subscribe down below. It's cheap, it's quick, it is easy to do, and we're trying to reach 300,000 subs by the end of the year, and it's only going to be possible with your help, so thank you all so very much. And if you want to take your support for the channel another step further, consider checking out my Patreon as well, where you can get access to all of my videos completely free of YouTube ads. You get a shout out in the credits of every single video as well, and you can support me for as little as $1 a month over there too, which is going a very long way right now. A huge thank you to all of my supporters over on Patreon, especially the new ones recently. You are making a massive difference, especially when things are a little bit tough on YouTube right now. Advertisers aren't paying so well, there's nothing really going on in the world of Bleach until July, so yeah, your support does go an extraordinarily long way, but frankly, even if you're just here watching the videos, that is a massive help in and of itself, so thank you all so very much. On a completely unrelated note, first up is a word from today's sponsor. So Bleach Soul Resonance has got me looking closely at the mobile game landscape recently, and when one of the most famous of the bunch reached out wanting to support the channel, I figured I'd at least take a look. What actually caught my interest, though, is their new collaboration with a game series that was once very dear to me, Assassin's Creed. Assassin's Creed 2 remains my favourite game in the series to date, so to see it receiving this kind of love still is absolutely heartening. And it's true, 5 iconic assassins from the series, Edward Kenway, Bayek, Basim, Kassandra, and yes, Ezio himself, are joining Raid as legendary champions for a limited time, and each champion's appearance has been faithfully recreated from their original Assassin's Creed games. Plus, Ezio is actually free. To unlock him, all players have to do is log into the game for 7 days over the course of the limited time event, and once you've recruited Ezio to your collection, continue logging in for another 7 days to keep the rewards flowing with gear to help Ezio get up to speed quickly. The event is themed entirely around Assassin's Creed. Kassandra is the first champion from Raid's newest faction, the Argonauts, while the event dungeon boss is Pontiff Augustine, which feels like a real throwback to when you had to take down the Pope himself in Assassin's Creed 2. By downloading the game via my personal link, you also gain access to 4 bonus heroes, including 2 legendary heroes that will help you hit the ground running. These are characters that will help you advance quickly, moving from campaigns to dungeons to the clan boss, and then the arena. There's a pretty massive amount of content here, and if you don't want to play on your phone, you can play Raid on your PC to get the best out of its visuals. As someone who loves to collect characters, champions like Lady Mikage and Helior really stand out to me. Lady Mikage, despite being a creepy spider woman, looks like she could be a Bleach villain, while Helior feels like he stepped right out of Dark Souls. So if you're interested in playing or just want to take a look at the Assassin's Creed collab, then click the link in the description or scan my QR code to get 4 characters, including legendary champion Karato, to help you get started the right way. Brand new players can even pick from 6 promo codes for a legendary champion of their choice, including the mythical Sun Wukong, so visit my link or scan my QR code today to not only receive these bonuses and more, but to also directly support the channel as well. Thanks again to Raid Shadow Legends for supporting the video. Right, but moving on, Sosuke Aizen and Kenpachi Zaraki. Both characters are extremely strong, extremely popular, and extremely prevalent in the story and world of Bleach, and yet never seem to come into contact whatsoever, let alone fight. These are two fan-favourite Shinigami who always miss one another, as if travelling on parallel lines. When Aizen escaped the Soul Society and ascended to Wako Mundo, Kenpachi wasn't present. When Aizen invaded Karakura Town, Kenpachi was one of the 4 captains left behind and imprisoned in Wako Mundo. And when Aizen was set free by Kyoraku in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Kenpachi was out cold at the time. At least he was in the anime. In the manga, I think Kenpachi was there, but they just didn't interact. Honestly, more so than the fact that the two of them are extremely powerful, what makes this potential matchup so fascinating to me, and to many others I think, is the way they are both so hugely important to the narrative and world of Bleach, so ever-present in their own way, and yet they never cross paths. It's very interesting, as if showing two sides of the Bleach story forever separate. In fact, much has been made of the fact that their only interaction, if you can even call it that, comes when the Ryoka arrive in the Serete, and Aizen, at the end of the captain's meeting, calls after Kenpachi when the 11th Division captain charges out to find the intruders. So it's only natural that this would persist as a dream what-if scenario for many people. What would an interaction between the two of them look like, let alone an actual fully fledged fight? Well, a reader wondered that themselves, asking Kubo the following question. Sosuke Aizen and Zaraki Kenpachi are two of the strongest characters in the series, yet they never get to interact with each other. Why is that? I always wanted to see these two fight each other. Well, as for why they never get to interact, I outlined it above. The story never really allowed for it, to be totally honest, but it's still interesting all the same, and it's interesting to consider the different avenues the story could have taken in order for this to happen and what that might have looked like. Kenpachi didn't have to be imprisoned in Wako Mundo after all, but it does, in many ways, make the most sense for him to be the one to come and save Ichigo from Tesla in that very specific moment. But he certainly didn't have to be there. He could have been brought to the fake Karakura town instead, on Kubo's part, though it's likely he would have ended up just facing an Espada before being taken out by Aizen like every other captain. And that leads us to Kubo's answer quite nicely, which is fairly blunt, and reads, I mean, that's because a fight between these two wouldn't really be any fun. I guess he's leaving it intentionally vague, but to me it sounds like he's trying to avoid being, well, too blunt, but that is kind of the truth of it, right? It feels fairly obvious, to me anyway. A fight between the two of them wouldn't be any fun because Kenpachi loses unequivocally at every single juncture. In terms of the places and situations the two characters could have met and fought, throughout the narrative, Kenpachi would lose every single time, pretty much without question. Unfortunately for Kenpachi, despite his massive power and strength, he's always lagging behind Aizen, who remains a generous step ahead at every potential crossroads they might have. Captain Aizen of the Soul Society arc, even before he gets a hold of the Hogyoku, would be more than strong enough to cut down the Kenpachi of the Soul Society arc, where the captain is at his weakest point by far in the present-day series. If Captain Aizen can stop Ichigo's bankai with a single finger, then this version of Kenpachi would be taken out without Aizen breaking so much as a sweat. I mean, it would be very similar to how he defeated Komamura. The same is obviously true of the Arankar arc as well, where Aizen continues to be leagues above Kenpachi. I mean, Kenpachi struggles to defeat Neutra. He does eventually do it, but he does struggle. It's a long-winded fight. While Aizen is pinning Grimjo to the ground with nothing but his spiritual pressure, not even rising from his chair to do so. Certainly in the first half of the entire series, and frankly right the way through to maybe the second half of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Aizen is of a similar level to Yamamoto when it comes to what a pure Shinigami can achieve. Obviously, Aizen goes beyond Yamamoto when he transcends, but in terms of pure Shinigami skills, this puts him right at the very pinnacle. Meanwhile, Kenpachi, he's very strong, but he doesn't really come close to be totally brutally honest most of the time. Come the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Kenpachi obviously receives a gigantic boost to his strength by killing Unohana and unlocking the secrets of his Zanpakuto, but Aizen too has grown even stronger than before, frankly almost inexplicably. Despite being imprisoned in Muken for 2 years by this point, Aizen has become more powerful, in Urahara's own words, than when he was defeated by Ichigo. At least as far as, again, being a pure Shinigami anyway, since he lost most, if not all of his transcendent power at this point. Now he's only immortal thanks to being fused with the Hogyoku, but the rest of Aizen's strength, as far as we know, is that of a Shinigami, just again the absolute apex. Either way, it's not important. What's important is that he's still way above even this late-stage version of Kenpachi, because he too has grown to the point where he's now combating even Soul King Yhwach. I'd argue towards the end of the series is maybe where the characters are at their closest, but even then the gulf in power still remains. Really, Kenpachi's only chance would be if the late-stage Thousand-Year Blood War version of the character, with Bankai and everything, fought Captain Aizen without the Hogyoku back in the Soul Society arc. But even then, I don't think it would necessarily be easy, but I think Kenpachi could perhaps score a win. So ultimately, that's the simple reality of the question, at least in my opinion. Kenpachi doesn't stand a chance against any form of Aizen at any point where they could have met and could have fought, so the fight wouldn't be any fun. But I could be totally wrong, let me know your thoughts down in the comments as always. Next up, the idea of forbidden Kidō has always been a fascinating one, that someone would create such magic, only for it to eventually be outlawed once presumably other people caught wind of what these things can do. Those practitioners skilled enough would still know how to use said spells forevermore. It's not like they're scrubbing that knowledge from their minds, but are sworn to never wield them again. I believe the first time we ever saw someone using forbidden spells was in the Turn Back the Pendulum arc, where Tessai combined 2 of them to help Kisuke transport the hollow-fied Shinigami back to the 12th Division in total secrecy, which we'll get to in a moment. And then again, when Yamamoto used Hado 96 Ito Kaso against Aizen, with Ito Kaso specifically being forbidden because its activation requires the user to sacrifice a piece of themselves. In this instance, Yamamoto relinquished his arm, which had been charred in the battle with Wonder Weiss. And then, while never mentioned as such in the manga, Hado 99 Goryu Tenmetsu is revealed to be a forbidden spell too in Can't Fear Your Own World, because it draws upon the Reimyaku of the landscape around it to power up during activation. Reimyaku being a kind of special, bespoke power that flows through each world at an individual level. So, for example, the special Reimyaku of Waco Mundo is what was helping to awaken Chad's specific hollow-based abilities. So for Goryu Tenmetsu to actively draw on and sap that very power from the world around it, it's incredibly dangerous to use, hence why it's forbidden. Presumably it could cause, if enough of them were used, the potential collapse of said world. Anyway, that's total speculation on my part. The point is, we haven't seen many forbidden spells, though it makes sense in my opinion that everything from Ito Kaso and above would be classified as such. I mean, it doesn't really make sense for 96 and 99 to be forbidden, but 97 and 98 to not be. To be honest, I imagine it's actually Hado 95 and above, but we don't know that for sure. Anyway, going back to the 2 spells that Tessai uses in Turn Back the Pendulum, they're called Jikan Teishi and Kukan Teni, and they have the power to stop time and move space, respectively. It's fairly understandable, in my opinion, why the ability to freeze time would be forbidden, and to be honest, I have to wonder what the limits of such a power really are. It's kind of terrifying to think that a particularly strong and knowledgeable sorcerer may know that spell, and could just suspend time around themselves if they ever snapped one day. But, regarding Kukan Teni and the power to move space, a reader had a question regarding that particular Kidō spell, and asked Kubo the following. Why was spatial dislocation labelled as a forbidden Kidō? That just seems weird to me, as it appears to be very useful. To which Kubo replied, there are 2 reasons for that. 1, because it could be used to commit all sorts of crimes, and 2, because pinpointing the exact range and destination is extremely difficult, and misjudging either one of them can result in fatal injuries or even instant death. It's a surprisingly in-depth answer for Kubo, which is always nice to see, but I do have some questions of my own. But first of all, I love the fact that the question implies that the only reason something as crazy as moving space itself shouldn't be forbidden is just because it seems very useful. I mean, yeah, I guess it would be, but that doesn't mean it isn't also massively dangerous as well. I guess it never really crossed my mind to question why moving space would be a forbidden spell, because I suppose inherently you don't necessarily think about the downsides, the disadvantages, how difficult it might be to use, but just the idea of actively being able to move space itself always felt like such a crazy leap to me that I was like, yeah, this makes sense. Someone with the power to essentially control space and time is not something you really want. But it is an interesting spell, actually, because we do see that Tessai has lifted not just the Vizard themselves, but the entire patch of land they were all laying upon. So I assume, as a result of the spell, he teleported that entire lot. I mean, Kubo actually goes into some detail in his answer there about how a power like this works, and that's definitely the case, but it requires considerable forethought and planning even on Tessai's part. Anyway, of the two reasons Kubo gives for why this is forbidden, point 1 feels very flimsy to me. It was just because it can be used to commit all sorts of crimes. I mean, sure, but can't loads of Kidō? Kyoko, which essentially turns you invisible, not only isn't forbidden, but it's a relatively low-level Bakudo in the 20s, I think. Hakufuku is literally shown being used to knock out prison guards. Pretty much any kind of binding spell could be used realistically to commit a crime. I mean, the same goes for Hado spells as well. But I get it. It's only one portion of the reason, and the second point definitely makes a lot more sense to me. It sounds like Kukan Teni is incredibly precarious and difficult to use. When transporting the Vizard, Tessai had to envision the precise range of the spell and its destination at the same time, as well as keep hold of all 8 holofied Shinigami at once. I'm assuming he also moved himself and Kisuke too, as we see Tessai in front of the patch of land, in front of Urahara's lab, still in the Kidō spell stance. So yeah, it's not hard to see why it's forbidden. It's incredibly dangerous and scary to think that had Tessai slightly miscalculated, presumably had any of these ingredients, these components, slipped out of his mind for the briefest of seconds while he was in the middle of utilizing this spell, everyone involved could have been brutally killed, presumably. I feel like this is one of those spells, and again, this is just me speculating here, this is just conjecture on my part, but I feel like it's one of those spells that requires such immense discipline. Because I'm assuming that to move things like that, Tessai needs to think of everything. You know, when he's thinking of moving Shinji, he has to think of all of Shinji's limbs and everything like that. If one of Shinji's arms were to fall out of Tessai's mind in the midst of the spell, it might be left on the floor where they moved the land from, hence the horrific injuries. Up next, continuing on with the Kidō questions, a reader pitched a question to Kubo about Kaido, the healing branch of Kidō, which I think we get quite a lot of, wondering how effective Kaido really is, and how it works, with a question that reads as follows. To what degree of injury and illness can Kaido be used to heal? Also, do you have to visualize the function of each organ in order to restore it, or is it more like a surgical operation? Honestly, it's a good question, or a good few questions, I guess, because all we ever see from Kaido is a magic spell, essentially, with no instruction or implication whatsoever. Normally, when Kaido is being applied to an injured patient, there's just a ball of light of some kind that hovers over or encompasses their injuries. It's the most vague, generalized thing, and then eventually they're fixed. You know, a good example of this is how Hiyori's bifurcated body was somehow stitched back together again by Unohana in the wake of the fake Karakura Town arc. When Lisa questions Unohana on whether or not Hiyori will live, Unohana notes that Kidō is no different from medical treatment, and she succeeded in healing the Vizard's physical structure. However, whether Hiyori actually pulls through and survives or not will come down to whether she retains the will to live. So it's all very nebulous, yet capable of performing incredible feats. To understand how Kaido actually works and is performed feels like very granular, very nerdy, in-depth iceberg stuff, which I do love. And so Kubo responded by saying, healing according to one's imagination is the accurate way of describing it, but as you need to properly heal the blood vessels and tendons, one needs to possess proper knowledge of the body's anatomy. To be honest, this makes the most sense of the answers I could have imagined, and it does work with what we see from Kaido in the series past. Basically, once the spell is cast, the user imagines the healing process taking place, and it works in that way. But as Kubo says, in order for it to be truly effective, one needs to know how the body works, essentially both inside and out, so they can envision the proper healing methods. That does mean, then, that someone like Unohana, who was the ultimate healer of the Soul Society, can, theoretically, heal anything she understands. And I kind of wonder what the limits are, because her stitching Hiyori's body back together seems pretty wild to me, but can Unohana just cast the spell and then imagine somehow reconnecting Hiyori's spine, for example, and it just working? Because, and I'm no doctor, but I'm fairly sure that's not how spines work. But maybe with this kind of power, Unohana can just imagine, I'm reconnecting Hiyori's spine, putting her body back together, and she will eventually be able to stand and walk and fight again. But then, apparently, some of it came down to Hiyori's own will to live. Also, one thing we don't really know regarding Kaido is whether or not there are multiple different styles of spell or levels of Kaido magic, because while we know there are 99 different Hado and Bakudo, we don't know if there are numbered classifications for Kaido specifically, and if there are, what does that mean? For example, could a Kaido level 99 heal absolutely anything with very little use of the imagination? Or even little knowledge of anatomy, like you could just cast the spell and the person is magically healed. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to know anything. I mean, you would likely know a lot if you can just cast it anyway, but either way, it makes sense to me. Those who are best at Kaido are those who are truly medically trained, and I think that's really cool. And finally, as always, we try to end these Klub Outside videos on a more light-hearted topic. And this is definitely a fun one. There's not a lot to say about it, but I was surprised. Plus, I know there's a regular commenter on the channel who I think will appreciate this one, as it's about them. Kubo was asked the following question, which reads, it's said that Isane has a lot of brute strength, but are there any legends or happenings revolving around this? I'll be honest, I don't remember there specifically being rumors or myths about Isane's purported physical strength, but I do like how this reader frames it like Isane is some kind of folklore or legendary creature. You know, are there any tall tales revolving around the immense physical strength of Isane Kotetsu? It's just so funny to me. Anyway, Kubo replied saying, back in their academy days, she broke a wooden sword in two in front of a vulgar man that was hitting on her sister Kione and chased him off. Honestly, that sounds pretty awesome, and that's a side of Isane I would like to see personally. It would make sense for the usually timid and reserved Isane to secretly have a dark and terrifying side to her, mirroring her former captain in that way. But either way, it's nice to see her standing up for her sister, who is absolutely tiny by comparison. Alright, but that's it for today's video, guys. As always, I do hope you enjoyed it, and thank you so very much for watching. I hope you took something of value away from it as well. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below as to which of the topics you enjoyed the most. I would love to get your thoughts. I'd love to read them all. How do you feel about Aizen versus Kenpachi? I imagine that's going to be the talk of the town. Am I right in regards to I think Kenpachi would lose every single matchup they could realistically have throughout the narrative? Let me know you think I might be wrong. I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. Tell me your thoughts and feelings regarding Forbidden Kidō, the fact that moving space itself is forbidden. How does that work? How do you feel about that? About Kaido, about Isane and her incredible strength? Let me know all of your thoughts down in the comments below. Once again, everyone, thank you so very much for watching. Consider hitting subscribe if you haven't done already. I really do appreciate all of the support. It does mean absolutely everything to me. And consider checking out my Patreon as well. Again, your support over there is making a massive difference. It really is helping to keep the lights on here on the channel, and I really do appreciate it. So thank you to each and every one of you over there. Once again, it does mean absolutely everything, and it is making a huge difference. Alright guys, but until next time, I'll catch you later, and I'll see you then.